Hello, today what we'll do is learn to write equations of lines given certain pieces of information. And I'm going to start this lesson only with given a slope and a y-intercept. So what we're moving away from is graphing and analyzing equations and going backwards to look at pieces of information so we can now write the equations. So we will start learning to write equations given certain pieces of information. Today in particular, it is about what if I'm given only a slope and a y-intercept. So that is what today's lesson will cover. Get that bell out of the way. So just like normal, what we'll do is talk about all of the prior knowledge that we'll need to learn to write equations. And we'll start with remembering about slope-intercept form. What is slope-intercept form? If an equation looks like y equals mx plus b, it is in slope-intercept form, where the m is the slope and the b is the y-intercept. When we write equations, most of our answers will look like slope-intercept form. So we'll know when we're done when we have an equation that looks like y equals mx plus b. So that's an important piece of prior knowledge. Something else we need to remember is how ordered pairs work. So we have the x-coordinate and the y-coordinate. We need to remember how to count slope, because we'll eventually look at graphs and we'll need to find the slope in order to write the equation. So we have to remember how to count slope by looking at a graph. And we count it with the rise over the run that gives us the slope. So we'll need to remember that. We need to remember what an intercept is. An intercept is where a line crosses an axis. So for example, the y-intercept is when x equals 0. So we have to have that recall to make our life a lot easier. We will also need to remember how to use substitution as well, but that's eventually. So let's get into some new material. Learning how to work with information so that we can write equations of lines. Remember, we're going to go backwards. I'm going to give you pieces of information, and you have to think and then put it together to write the equation of lines. So if we were to write an equation of a line that's in slope-intercept form, remember slope-intercept form is y equals mx plus b. If we were to have information and then create the equation for it, we're going to need some information. We're going to need the slope, remember for the m is the slope, and we're going to need a point. In this case, specifically the y-intercept. Okay, so in order to write equations, we need a slope and a point. A slope and a point. We need that information in order to write equations. So here's an example. If we have a line that has a slope of 1/2 and the y-intercept of 2, we can write the equation in slope-intercept form. All we have to do is switch out the information that we have. If we need a slope, and the slope is 1/2, and we need the y-intercept, and the y-intercept is 2, it is easy for us to write that equation. So looking at slope-intercept form, we need to have a slope and a y-intercept. We just switch out the information that we're given. Switch out the slope, switch out the y-intercept, and there is our equation. So we're going to be dealing with given information. We're going to have to think, and we're going to have to then create the equation that fits that information. So this is kind of fun because it forces us to think. All right, so let's do a couple of examples. In the first example, I'm going to give some information in this form. It's going to be a lot of words. Okay, so write the equation of the line that has a slope of -1 and a y-intercept of -3. So we have to think, what is it that we need to write an equation? What information do we have? And then put it together. So in this case, we're looking to have an equation in slope-intercept form. We need a slope and we need a y-intercept. Fortunately, we have that information. The slope is -1. The y-intercept is -3. We're ready to switch out that information from slope-intercept form to create the equation. So instead of y equals mx plus b, the slope is -1. We put the -1 where the slope should be. The y-intercept is -3. We put the -3 where it's supposed to be. We keep everything else. Okay, we keep the y, we keep the equal sign, we keep the x, we keep the plus sign. Everything else changes. The only thing we need to do once we make that substitution is to clean it up. We're just going to clean it up. I don't want to see a -1 in front of the x. That's unprofessional. And I don't want to see a plus minus. That's also unprofessional. So we're going to clean everything up. And what I mean by clean it up is make it look professional. -1 times x is just -x. Plus minus is the same thing as negative. So we clean it up and make it look professional. And that's how I want to see the equations. Okay, so make sure you clean things up. So we have basic information, and then we're going to work backwards. All right, so let's do an example that might be a little bit more challenging. So let's say I asked to write an equation of a line that has a slope of 2/3 and then passes through a certain point. So we have a line that has a slope of 2/3 and passes through a certain point. We need to write the equation. So we have to think and work backwards. So the first question I have is, what do you think this means? The ordered pair, 0, -4. What does that mean? If the x is 0, this ordered pair is the y-intercept. So we're looking at the y-intercept. All right, we'll learn tomorrow about how to do this a harder way, but if we're thinking, we can recognize this as the y-intercept. So this is our y-intercept, which also means that we can write it a different way. We can just call it the y-intercept is -4. We have our slope. Our slope is 2/3. And now we're ready to write our equation. So we have a slope of 2/3, a y-intercept of -4. We're ready to think backwards, put together the pieces that we need, and we can write our equation. Again, we're trying to make it fit. Y equals mx plus b. We keep the y. The y stays y. The equal sign stays there. The m is 2/3. We keep the x stays there. We keep the plus sign stays there. And then our b, our y-intercept. The y-intercept was -4. So we just switch out the information we need, and now all we have to do is clean up this mess. This is messy and unprofessional. I don't want any of that in my classes, so we're going to clean that up. And when we clean up a plus negative, it turns into a minus. Plus negative is minus. So we have a very pretty looking equation. So what we're looking at is, if we have a slope of 2/3 passing through 0, -4, this is the equation of that line. So we're thinking and working backwards. So we can also use some thinking to look at graphs. I can show you the picture of a graph, and you can then think to write the equation of that line. Now what we can do is write the equation of a line given only the picture of the graph. So we can just look at the picture of a graph and then write the equation of the line. Here's an example. So if I have this graph, what I can do is look at this picture and then write the equation of the line that this is. So remember, to write an equation, I need two pieces of information. I need a slope and I need a y-intercept. So what I'm going to do is look at this picture and get those two pieces of information. So just like we talked about in prior knowledge, I have to remember to count slope, rise over run. So we have to remember how to count slope from point to point to get our rise over our run. We can do that with this graph. Okay, so I can go from the bottom point to the top point by counting how many spaces it goes up or down and how many spaces it goes left or right. I start from this point and I'm going up 1, 2, 3, 4. So I'm going up 4. So my rise is up 4. Now I need my run. So for my run, if I went up 4, I now need to go left 1, 2, 3. So my run, I'm going to the left 3 places. So for my run, I'm going left 3. So that means I have a rise of positive 4, a run of negative 3. So my rise over my run is 4 over negative 3, or I can also call that negative 4 over 3. Remember, as long as there's only one minus sign, the whole doesn't matter which part has the minus sign, the top or the bottom. So this is the same as this. There's only one minus sign, only one minus sign. It can go up or it can go down. So we have our slope. Now what we need to do is look at the picture to see if we can find the y-intercept. Where does this graph cross the y-axis? So we have to look and see, where does this line cross the y-axis? And it crosses the y-axis right here. Down 1, 2, 3. It crosses the y-axis at negative 3. So our y-intercept is negative 3. And now what we're ready to do is use this piece of information to write the equation. So again, if we're writing in slope-intercept form, I need y equals mx plus b. The y remains y, the equal sign remains equal sign. The slope, the m, we found to be negative 4 over 3, so we're going to replace the m with negative 4 over 3. The x stays x, the plus sign stays there, and we just switch out the b. The b is negative 3. We make our b negative 3. So all we have to do now is clean up our mess. Okay, so we have a little mess going on there with a plus minus. Remember, I don't like plus minuses. So our equation is y equals negative 4/3 x minus 3. There is the equation of this graph. So we're able to take information and work backwards to write our equations. And that's it for this lesson. We're going to get into more complicated equation writing in future lessons, but this is it for now. So I wish you luck, and we'll talk later.